What if the very thing you've been taught to avoid, delusion, is actually the first requirement for building a life that looks impossible from the outside? Before every great achievement, there was a phase where the dream looked irrational, premature, even embarrassing. From a Stoic lens, this isn't madness. It's a temporary suspension of consensus reality. The mind must first accept an image that the world has not yet validated. If you only allow yourself to believe what is already proven, you are forever trapped reacting to life instead of shaping it. The Stoics understood this quietly. You must hold an internal vision so firmly that external contradiction loses its authority over you. Most people confuse realism with wisdom, but realism is often just fear wearing a respectable mask. Society rewards those who stay grounded, but punishes those who dare to act before permission is granted. Yet every meaningful transformation begins with a period where your inner world is far ahead of your outer results. To the untrained eye, this looks like delusion. To the disciplined mind, it is rehearsal. Marcus Aurelius wrote about living according to reason, but reason does not mean shrinking your ambition to match your current circumstances. It means acting in alignment with your highest rational self, not your present limitations. There is a critical psychological phase where you must behave as though your future self already exists. This is not pretending for applause. It is quiet, internal alignment. The Stoics practiced premeditatio, mentally living future outcomes before they arrived, not to fantasize, but to prepare the nervous system. When you adopt a vision early, you train your emotions to tolerate delayed gratification, isolation, and doubt. Without this phase, most people abandon their dreams not because they are incapable, but because they cannot endure being misunderstood long enough. The danger is not delusion itself, it is unexamined delusion. Stoic discipline demands that belief be paired with relentless self-governance. You don't blindly hope, you build character strong enough to support the outcome you imagine. This is where most people fail. They want the identity without the behavior. True Stoic delusion is internal certainty paired with external humility. You do the work in silence. You allow others to doubt you. You don't argue your future into existence. You outgrow the need for validation entirely. Notice how fragile people become when their identity is questioned. That fragility comes from borrowing reality from others instead of forging it internally. The Stoics warned against this dependency. If your confidence collapses when someone doubts you, then your belief was never yours to begin with. Embracing delusion first means choosing your own internal authority before the world agrees with you. It means your sense of self is no longer outsourced to applause, approval, or immediate results. There is also a biological element most people overlook. The brain cannot distinguish vividly imagined experiences from real ones. When you repeatedly hold an image of who you are becoming, you are rewiring your perception, attention, and decision-making. Opportunities begin to stand out. Resistance becomes data instead of discouragement. What looks like manifestation on the surface is often just disciplined perception shaped by sustained belief. The Stoics would call this living in accordance with nature, not the nature of comfort, but the nature of growth. Eventually, reality catches up, not because the universe rewarded you, but because you became the kind of person who could no longer live inconsistently with their vision. This is the moment most people call luck. But luck is often delayed alignment. The early delusion trained your patience, your discipline, your tolerance for uncertainty. By the time the external result appears, the internal transformation has already happened. And that is why so many people fail to sustain success. They skipped the inner work and chased proof instead. For now, resist the urge to be understood. Resist the pressure to explain your vision. There is power in holding something fragile and unfinished without exposing it to premature judgment. The Stoics valued restraint, not because they lacked ambition, but because they understood timing. Your belief does not need witnesses. It needs endurance. Let the world call it delusion. History always renames it later. There is a moment in every real transformation where the old identity begins to die before the new one is fully formed. This is the most dangerous phase because nothing feels stable anymore. The habits that once defined you stop working. The rewards that once motivated you no longer satisfy you. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are becoming. To outsiders, this looks like confusion or regression. Internally, it feels like collapse. The Stoics understood this stage implicitly. Growth is not additive, it is subtractive. Something must be stripped away before something stronger can take its place. Most people retreat at this point. They mistake discomfort for failure and run back to the familiar self because it offers psychological safety. But safety is often the enemy of rebirth. Identity collapse happens when your old self can no longer carry the weight of your future vision. Your values shift faster than your environment. Your tolerance for distraction disappears. You start to feel misaligned in rooms where you once belonged. This is not arrogance, it is evolution. Epictetus warned that if you want to improve, you must be willing to appear foolish for a time. What he meant was this exact phase, when your external life no longer reflects your internal standards. The mind resists rebirth because it craves coherence. It wants a story that makes sense now. But rebirth requires you to tolerate narrative gaps. You must live without a clear label, without social confirmation, without a neat explanation. This is where delusion deepens, not as fantasy, but as faith in a version of yourself that has not yet been proven. The Stoic discipline here is endurance. You do not rush to redefine yourself publicly. You allow the internal restructuring to finish before you demand external recognition. There is grief in this process that few talk about. You grieve the person you were because that identity kept you safe, even if it kept you small. You grieve the approval you used to receive for being predictable, agreeable, or realistic. Rebirth is lonely because it removes you from the familiar emotional economy you once depended on. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should expect resistance whenever you act according to reason instead of habit. That resistance is not just external, it comes from within, from the parts of you that fear being left behind. Eventually, something stabilizes. Not your circumstances, but your standards. You stop needing reassurance. You stop explaining your choices. You stop seeking urgency in validation. This is the quiet emergence of the new identity. It doesn't announce itself. It expresses itself through restraint, consistency, and calm. The Stoics didn't chase confidence. They cultivated self-command. Rebirth feels less like excitement and more like inevitability. You simply cannot return to who you were without betraying yourself. What most people never realize is that identity rebirth permanently alters how reality responds to you, not mystically, but practically. Your boundaries sharpen, your decisions simplify. You waste less energy negotiating with doubt. Opportunities align not because life suddenly favors you, but because you no longer sabotage alignment by clinging to outdated versions of yourself. The delusion you embraced early has now hardened into character, and character, to the Stoics, was destiny. Stay in this phase long enough, and you begin to sense something profound. The old self didn't fail. It expired. It served its purpose. Rebirth is not about becoming better in the way society measures improvement. It is about becoming internally coherent. When your thoughts, actions, and values stop fighting each other, momentum becomes effortless. This is the moment when dreams stop feeling distant and start feeling overdue. Rebirth feels threatening to others because it exposes the illusion they are still invested in. When you begin to change, you are no longer playing your assigned role in their psychological ecosystem. Every relationship has an unspoken agreement. You stay predictable, and I won't have to question myself. When you break that contract, It creates friction, not because you are doing something wrong, but because your transformation destabilizes the narratives others rely on to feel secure. The Stoics understood this as a form of social inertia. People defend the familiar not out of malice, but out of fear of self-examination. Your rebirth quietly asks a dangerous question. If you can change, why haven't they? That question is rarely answered consciously, but it is felt deeply. Instead of confronting it, most people project discomfort outward. They call you unrealistic. They question your motives. They frame your discipline as obsession, your solitude as arrogance, your growth as detachment. This is not critique, it is self-protection. Marcus Aurelius warned that people resent those who remind them of neglected duties. Your evolution is not an attack, but it is perceived as one. There is also a loss of control that unsettles people. When your identity was familiar, others knew how to influence you, predict you, and emotionally negotiate with you. Rebirth removes those levers. You no longer respond the same way. You no longer seek the same validation. You no longer fear the same consequences. This creates uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds resistance. To the untrained mind, someone who cannot be easily read feels dangerous. The Stoics valued apatheia, freedom from emotional manipulation, not because it made one cold, but because it made one sovereign. This is why isolation becomes inevitable, not as punishment, but as protection. Isolation accelerates transformation because it removes constant identity reinforcement. Every environment pressures you to remain consistent with who you were there. When you step away, the nervous system finally has space to recalibrate. The Stoics practiced voluntary withdrawal, not to escape life, but to observe it clearly. In solitude, you are no longer reacting. You are responding. There is no audience to perform for, no mirror to negotiate with. Isolation also reveals what is real about you and what was borrowed. Without social feedback loops, many people feel disoriented, and that is precisely the point. Rebirth requires disorientation. If you feel temporarily lost, it means the old map no longer applies. The danger is not being alone. The danger is returning too quickly to noise just to feel familiar again. Seneca warned that constant social stimulation weakens judgment. Silence, on the other hand, sharpens it. There is a phase in isolation where the ego panics. It tells you that you are falling behind, missing out, becoming irrelevant. This is the last defense of the old identity. The Stoics would say this is where discipline matters most. Not discipline of productivity, but discipline of attention. You learn to sit with discomfort without interpreting it as failure. You stop mistaking urgency for importance. And slowly, something profound happens. Your sense of self stabilizes internally instead of externally. When you emerge from this period, you do not return the same. You speak less, but with more weight. You move slower, but with clearer intent. You stop explaining yourself because your life begins to do the explaining. This is why rebirth unsettles others even more when you return, because your calm exposes chaos without saying a word. You are no longer competing. You are no longer convincing. You are simply aligned. The Stoics believed that a well-ordered soul creates a well-ordered life. Isolation is the forge where that order is established. Not forever, not dramatically, just long enough for the new identity to root deeply enough that it cannot be shaken by opinion or pressure. Once that happens, you can re-enter the world without being absorbed by it. You no longer need to defend your path. You embody it. Most people self-sabotage right before alignment because alignment threatens the last illusion they're still clinging to, that they can turn back without consequence. As long as success feels distant, failure feels reversible. You can still tell yourself stories. It wasn't the right time. I wasn't fully committed. I could have done it if I really tried. But when alignment approaches, those stories collapse. You sense that if you continue forward, there will be no excuse left, no psychological escape hatch. and that level of responsibility terrifies the untrained mind. The nervous system interprets alignment as danger, not relief. You are stepping into unfamiliar territory where old coping mechanisms no longer apply. The chaos you lived in was painful, but it was predictable. Growth removes predictability. The Stoics understood this fear intimately. They taught that humans often flee not from suffering, but from uncertainty. Right before alignment, uncertainty peaks, because the old self is gone, and the new self has not yet been tested. Sabotage becomes a way to restore the familiar, even if the familiar is miserable. This is why people suddenly procrastinate, pick fights, doubt themselves, numb out, or chase distractions right before a breakthrough. It looks irrational, but it's actually the ego's final defense. The old identity senses extinction. It does not care about your future. It only wants to survive. Seneca warned that the mind becomes its own tyrant when left unexamined. Sabotage is not laziness. It is loyalty to a version of yourself that is no longer fit to lead. There is also a deeper fear few are willing to admit. Success will force you to grieve your past self fully. If you align, you must accept that much of your suffering was not fate, it was delay. That realization is heavy. It means you were powerful earlier than you allowed yourself to believe. Many people would rather fail again than confront that truth. Failure keeps the story intact. Alignment rewrites it completely. The Stoic response to this moment is ruthless honesty paired with restraint. You do not try to motivate yourself emotionally. You do not seek reassurance. You simply do what is in your control, moment by moment, without negotiating with fear. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should do the work in front of you as if it were the last thing you were meant to do. This mindset neutralizes sabotage because it removes drama. Alignment does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, after you refuse to abandon yourself one last time. And if this moment resonates, if you recognize yourself standing right at that edge, pause here. This is where many people click away. But if you want more of this kind of thinking, more calm, grounded, reality-shifting insight, take a second to like this video and subscribe to PSYCHOVEST. Not for motivation, but for reminders of who you're becoming when doubt gets loud. After this point, something changes. When you resist sabotage long enough, the fear doesn't disappear. It loses authority. You realize it cannot stop you, only delay you. And once you see that clearly, alignment is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you allow. Alignment does not feel like constant confidence or excitement. In fact, it often feels quieter than you expect. There is less internal debate, fewer emotional negotiations. You wake up without the familiar heaviness of resistance, not because life is easy, but because your actions no longer betray your values. Decisions take less time. You don't spiral over choices that once consumed hours of mental energy. The Stoics would say, this is the mind returning to order, not pleasure, not euphoria, but coherence. Day to day, alignment feels like a subtle narrowing. Your tolerance for distraction drops. Things that once pulled at you emotionally, drama, comparison, approval, lose their grip. Not because you've become detached from life, but because your attention has become more valuable to you. You begin to feel almost allergic to what wastes time. This is not discipline through force, it's discipline through clarity. Epictetus taught that freedom comes from wanting less of what weakens you, not from acquiring more. There is also a strange emotional neutrality that can confuse people at first. You are not constantly chasing highs, but you are no longer plagued by lows either. Your mood stabilizes because your self-worth is no longer tied to daily outcomes. Wins don't inflate you. Setbacks don't collapse you. This steadiness can feel unfamiliar if you were once driven by anxiety or urgency. Many mistake this calm for stagnation, when in reality it is focus without friction. Alignment shows up in your body before it shows up in your circumstances. Your posture changes. Your breathing slows. You stop rushing through moments that don't require speed. The nervous system exits survival mode and enters execution mode. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that the soul colors the body. When your inner world settles, your outer presence becomes grounded. People feel it before they understand it. You also notice that your inner dialogue changes tone. The voice that once criticized you constantly becomes quieter, not because you silenced it, but because it no longer has leverage. You are no longer negotiating your worth with yourself. You know what you are building, even if the timeline is unclear. That certainty removes the need for harsh self-talk. The Stoics didn't aim to destroy emotion. They aimed to remove useless emotion. Alignment does exactly that. Another overlooked aspect is how solitude feels different once alignment takes root. Being alone no longer feels like waiting. It feels intentional. You are not isolating to escape. You are choosing space because it strengthens your direction. Silence becomes productive, not empty. Seneca wrote that time reveals itself fully only when it is not interrupted. In alignment, time feels slower but more substantial, as if each day actually belongs to you. Externally, life may still look ordinary for a while. That's the part most people don't prepare for. Alignment does not instantly reward you with visible success. It rewards you with consistency. You keep showing up without emotional theatrics. You do the work even when no one notices. And strangely, this is where momentum becomes unstoppable, because it no longer depends on motivation or mood. Perhaps the most unsettling part is this. Alignment removes the internal chaos you once used as proof that something important was happening. Without anxiety, urgency, or constant doubt, you might wonder if you've lost your edge. But what you've actually lost is resistance. The Stoics believed that virtue feels ordinary when practiced daily. Alignment feels the same way, quiet, grounded, almost anticlimactic. Until you look back and realize how far you've moved without burning yourself down. As alignment settles in, you begin to notice something subtle but powerful. Motivation stops being the driving force. You no longer need emotional spikes to begin. Action becomes almost automatic, not because it is effortless, but because resistance has been removed. The Stoics warned against relying on motivation because motivation is reactive. It depends on mood, inspiration, or external pressure. Alignment replaces motivation with obligation to self. You act because it would feel stranger not to. This is one of the clearest signs that transformation has taken root. Your relationship with time also changes. You stop rushing the future and stop resenting the present. Deadlines still exist, but they no longer feel like threats. You understand that progress is cumulative, not dramatic. Each day becomes less about achieving and more about maintaining internal order. This is why aligned people often appear patient to the point of indifference. They are not waiting for life to start. They are already living it correctly. You may also notice a reduction in emotional attachment to outcomes. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. The Stoics called this amor fati, loving the unfolding of events without needing to control them. When you are aligned, you put in full effort without demanding a specific result on a specific timeline. Paradoxically, this often accelerates results because desperation is no longer contaminating your decisions. Another shift happens in how you respond to setbacks. Instead of spiraling, you assess. Instead of blaming, you adjust. Setbacks lose their identity as personal failures and become information. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional efficiency. You feel disappointment briefly, then you move. The mind becomes trained to recover quickly, which is far more valuable than never failing at all. Alignment also brings a heightened sensitivity to integrity. Small compromises begin to feel heavy. You become less willing to say yes to things that dilute your focus or betray your values. This can make your life look smaller from the outside, fewer commitments, fewer distractions, but internally it feels expansive. You are no longer scattered, you are precise. Epictetus taught that strength comes from knowing what to refuse. Alignment makes refusal feel natural rather than forced. There is also a shift in how you experience other people's opinions. Criticism no longer wounds you deeply, and praise no longer intoxicates you. You listen, you extract what is useful, and you discard the rest without resentment. This emotional independence is often mistaken for coldness, but it is actually maturity. You are no longer living inside other people's emotional weather. At times, alignment can feel almost lonely, not because you lack connection, but because fewer people can meet you where you now stand. Conversations feel repetitive, complaints feel loud. You don't feel superior, you feel incompatible. The Stoics accepted this cost without resentment. They believed that clarity naturally separates. Not everyone can follow you into a life that demands self-responsibility. What's important to understand is that alignment is not a destination, it is a maintenance state. It requires daily recommitment, not heroic effort. You wake up, you do what is in your control, you release what is not, and you repeat. This simplicity is deceptive. Most people abandon it because it lacks drama. But drama was never progress. It was friction. Alignment feels boring to outsiders because it lacks visible chaos. There are no emotional spikes to observe, no dramatic highs or collapses to comment on, no constant reinvention to keep things entertaining. From the outside, an aligned life can look repetitive, restrained, even dull. The Stoics warned that people often confuse noise with progress. They are conditioned to equate intensity with importance. When they see someone moving calmly, steadily, without complaint or spectacle, they assume nothing significant is happening. They cannot see internal order, so they dismiss it. To those living it, however, alignment feels powerful precisely because of this quietness. There is no energy leak, no constant internal friction. You are no longer fighting yourself. That alone creates a sense of strength most people never experience. Power, in this sense, is not dominance or control over others. It is self-command. Epictetus taught that the strongest person is the one who governs their desires. From the outside, that governance looks uneventful. From the inside, it feels unshakable. Outsiders also find alignment boring because it removes emotional dependency. You are no longer reactive. You don't overshare. You don't seek sympathy or validation. This can make interactions feel flat to those who are used to bonding through complaint, drama, or urgency. Many relationships unconsciously rely on shared chaos. When you remove yourself from that cycle, people can feel disconnected, not because you've changed for the worse, but because the old emotional currency no longer works. Another reason alignment looks boring is that progress becomes invisible. The work is internal before it becomes external. You may be strengthening discipline, sharpening focus, refining standards, but none of that produces immediate spectacle. The Stoics believed that virtue often goes unnoticed because it does not announce itself. The loudest people are rarely the most effective, but effectiveness compounds quietly. Those living in alignment feel this compounding daily, even when no one else does. There is also an absence of emotional storytelling in aligned living. You stop narrating your life as a struggle or a triumph. You simply do what needs to be done. This lack of narrative can make your journey harder for others to follow. They want beginnings, conflicts, resolutions. Alignment offers maintenance, not milestones. To someone chasing meaning through emotion, maintenance feels empty. To someone who has suffered from instability, maintenance feels like freedom. For the person aligned, the power shows up in subtle ways. You recover faster. You don't panic under pressure. You don't abandon yourself when things go wrong. You trust your process even when results lag behind effort. That trust becomes grounding. It allows you to move through life without bracing for impact. The Stoics called this tranquility, not passivity, but preparedness without tension. This is why many people leave alignment just as it begins to work. They mistake calm for stagnation. They miss the adrenaline of chaos. They crave the identity of struggle because struggle made them feel alive. But alignment offers a deeper aliveness, one that doesn't burn you out. It replaces urgency with presence, intensity with depth, and depth rarely looks impressive from a distance. In time, the external results do come. But by then, the aligned person is no longer attached to proving anything. That's the final irony. The life others once found boring becomes quietly enviable. Stability, clarity, consistency, these age well. Drama does not. Many people don't just drift away from alignment. They actively return to chaos, because chaos gives them something alignment does not, a sense of identity through struggle. When life becomes orderly, the old emotional hooks disappear. There is no enemy to fight, no crisis to narrate, no urgency to justify inaction. For someone who built their sense of self around survival, this quiet can feel like erasure. The Stoics warned that humans often cling to suffering because it makes them feel necessary. Alignment removes that illusion. Chaos also offers an excuse to avoid responsibility. When everything feels overwhelming, you can always blame circumstances, but alignment strips that away. You become aware, sometimes painfully, of how much agency you actually have. That awareness is empowering, but it is also confronting. You can no longer hide behind confusion. You see clearly where you are choosing comfort over growth, distraction over discipline. Many people flee alignment not because it is hard, but because it is honest. Another reason people sabotage alignment is social gravity. Order isolates you from environments that thrive on emotional noise. When you stop participating in shared chaos, you threaten group equilibrium. You become less available for drama, less reactive to provocation, less interested in emotional bargaining. Over time, this creates distance. The unaligned interpret that distance as coldness or superiority, when in reality, it is simply incompatibility. The Stoics accepted this as a natural cost of living deliberately. There is also a strange grief that arises once alignment stabilizes. You realize how long you lived in unnecessary turmoil, how much energy you burned proving, chasing, reacting. This realization can hurt. Some people would rather re-enter chaos than sit with the regret of wasted time. Chaos feels familiar. Clarity feels exposing. Seneca wrote that nothing is heavier than realizing how much suffering was optional. Alignment forces that realization. Aligned living also removes the illusion of constant progress. Growth becomes subtle. You may go weeks without a dramatic breakthrough. To the impatient mind, this feels like regression, but in reality, it is consolidation. Like muscle between workouts, strength is forming quietly. The Stoics valued steadiness over speed. They understood that anything built too loudly collapses just as loudly. Interestingly, once alignment is threatened, people often create artificial problems. They start arguments, they overcommit, they seek stimulation. This is not self-destruction, it is self-avoidance. Silence demands self-presence. Chaos allows escape. The aligned person learns to notice this impulse and not obey it. That restraint becomes a form of power few ever master. As time passes, alignment begins to influence your perception of success itself. You stop fantasizing about dramatic turning points. You stop waiting for permission to feel satisfied. You recognize that peace is not the reward at the end, it is the operating system. From that system, everything else functions more efficiently. The Stoics didn't chase happiness. They pursued inner order. Happiness was a side effect. What's remarkable is that once alignment becomes familiar, chaos loses its appeal entirely. You can still move fast when needed. You can still take risks. But you are no longer addicted to emotional volatility. You choose intensity instead of being dragged by it. That choice marks the difference between someone who occasionally touches alignment and someone who lives there. As alignment deepens further, something unexpected happens. Your fear of loss begins to dissolve. Not because you believe you're invincible, but because you finally understand what can and cannot be taken from you. When your identity was external, tied to outcomes, roles, relationships, or recognition, loss felt like annihilation. But alignment relocates your sense of self inward. The Stoics were clear on this point. Only what depends on you can truly belong to you. Once you internalize that, fear loses its sharpest edge. This shift changes how you approach risk. You no longer cling desperately to what you have, nor do you chase recklessly for more. You act with a grounded boldness that comes from knowing you will remain intact regardless of outcome. This is why aligned people often take cleaner risks. They are not gambling their identity, only their effort. Failure becomes survivable because it is no longer personal. Success becomes sustainable because it is no longer intoxicating. There is also a noticeable softening of comparison. You stop measuring your life against other timelines, other personalities, other paths. Not out of superiority or resignation, but out of irrelevance. Comparison requires shared metrics, and alignment rewrites your metrics entirely. The Stoics rejected comparison because it distracts from virtue. In alignment, you understand that someone else's speed, success, or visibility has nothing to do with your direction. That realization frees immense mental energy. Another day-to-day reality of alignment is emotional honesty without emotional indulgence. You still feel disappointment, sadness, frustration, but you don't dramatize them internally. You acknowledge emotion, extract information, and continue forward. This is not repression. It is respect for emotion without surrendering authority to it. The Stoics believed emotions are signals, not commanders. Alignment trains you to listen without obeying blindly. You may also notice that aligned living alters how you experience effort. Work feels less exhausting, even when it is demanding, because you are no longer fighting yourself while doing it. Resistance was the true drain. When resistance disappears, effort becomes cleaner. This is why aligned people often appear disciplined without looking strained. Their energy is conserved, not constantly leaked through doubt and indecision. Over time, alignment creates a subtle but powerful sense of trust in yourself. Not blind confidence, earned trust. You've watched yourself act consistently. You've seen yourself endure discomfort without collapsing. That history builds internal credibility. You stop overthinking because you no longer need to prove to yourself that you will show up. The Stoics valued reputation with oneself above reputation with others. Alignment quietly establishes that reputation. Perhaps the most profound shift is how you relate to the future. You stop obsessing over how things should unfold. You prepare, you act, you adjust, but you no longer grip the timeline. Urgency fades, not because you lack ambition, but because you've stopped mistaking pressure for progress. The future becomes something you move towards steadily, not something you chase anxiously. And slowly, almost without noticing, alignment reshapes your baseline state. Calm becomes normal, focus becomes default, integrity becomes non-negotiable. Life does not become perfect, but it becomes coherent. And coherence, to the Stoics, was the foundation of a life well lived. In the end, alignment is not about becoming extraordinary in the eyes of others. It is about becoming unbreakable in your own. It begins with a phase the world calls delusion, passes through collapse and isolation, survives sabotage and silence, and finally settles into something so steady it no longer needs to announce itself. The Stoics were never interested in admiration. They were interested in freedom. Freedom from inner chaos. Freedom from emotional dependence. Freedom from living at war with yourself. What most people never realize is that alignment does not arrive when everything goes right. It arrives when you stop abandoning yourself when things go wrong, when your standards remain intact under pressure, when you choose order over urgency, depth over drama, and self-command over self-soothing. That is the real transformation, not a moment, not a breakthrough, but a way of living that compounds quietly, day after day. If you're walking this path, there will be long stretches where nothing looks impressive from the outside. That's not a sign you're off course. It's proof you're no longer performing. You're building something that doesn't collapse when attention fades. You're becoming someone who doesn't need chaos to feel alive. And once you reach that point, very little in this world can truly shake you. If this resonated and you want more calm, grounded insight like this, content that sharpens your mind instead of overstimulating it, like this video, subscribe to PSYCHOVEST and stay with the work. Not for motivation, not for escape, but for alignment. Because once you experience what it feels like to live in order with yourself, there is no going back.